Once upon a time, in the quaint village of Umuez, there lived a beautiful and gracious woman named Nkiru. Renowned for her devotion as a mother to her 3 young adult children, Nkiru was a paragon of maternal warmth and gentleness. People from all around gathered to learn from her benevolent nature. Husbands often sent their young wives to seek her wisdom on how to nurture a loving home, some out of envy, and others out of a genuine desire to emulate her virtues. Yet Nkiru's saintly demeanor was not effortless. It stemmed from her deep spiritual roots. She was a fervent believer, a dedicated Christian often referred to as born again. Her unshakable faith in God powered her through life's challenges. Nkiru was a pillar of prayer, her devotion to divine matters beyond reproach, her character a testament to her faith. Wherever she went, it was evident she was set apart, unashamed of the gospel, her conviction preceding even her introduction. Affectionately known as Oye Ozioma, or bearer of good news, she was a modern-day evangelist whose day was incomplete without sharing her faith. At dawn, she would engage in what was affectionately termed her morning cry, a routine of early evangelism, and by evening she wielded her megaphone at the bustling market to proclaim her message. This was the essence of Nkiru's remarkable life. Despite her spiritual wealth, Nkiru faced profound earthly struggles. Times were tough for her and her 3 grown children. They barely managed to scrape by, struggling daily to afford basic necessities and education. Yet Nkiru never lost hope, often comforting her children with assurances. "It will pass, my children," she would say tenderly. "The God I serve will not let us be shamed." Before tragedy struck, Nkiru had enjoyed a comfortable life in Lagos, alongside her beloved husband, a prosperous trader named Linus Easy. They lived a blessed existence, nothing amiss, their partnership a beautiful amalgamation of love and mutual support. However, their serene life capsized when Linus vanished at sea following a catastrophic accident, leaving Nkiru and their children shattered. Every night, she mourned the loss of her soulmate, the gaping void in her heart unfillable. In her grief, Nkiru returned to Umuez with her children, bearing the tragic news to her family. As no body was recovered, the villagers and kinsmen concluded that Linus was deceased and performed the final rites to ensure his spirit would rest peacefully. Thus, Nkiru donned the mantle of widowhood, her sorrow profound, mourning a husband whose physical presence was replaced by an empty tomb, a stark testament to her undying love and unresolved grief. Years passed, and Nkiru's children, now young adults, grappled with their persistent struggles. Once obedient and empathetic, her daughters Ozioma and Uche found themselves drained of patience as their teenage years unfurled. Influenced by peer pressure and ill company, they veered towards worldly pleasures, straying from the moral teachings instilled by their mother. They began to challenge Nkiru's parenting, turning rebellious. Criticisms flew at the meager meals and the simple clothes their mother managed to procure. Gradually, the girls deviated from their virtuous paths, dangerously flirting with the idea of trading their integrity for monetary gains. During this tumultuous period, Nkiru felt overwhelmed. Being a woman alone, she lacked the strength to combat her children's defiance and sought external support. She turned to the pastor of their church, hoping he could guide her wayward daughters. Despite his efforts, his words fell on deaf ears, leaving Nkiru helplessly watching her beautiful daughters tread a perilous path. Her son, Eken, the youngest, was more understanding and mature. He quietly supported his mother, often shedding tears in secret alongside her. He helped with farm work as much as his young muscles allowed and never ceased to offer words of encouragement after confrontations with his sisters. "We're growing, Mama," he would say. "Very soon I'll get a job after school. Just wipe your tears." Previously, the Ease family had lived comfortably. With Linus, the sole breadwinner, now gone, Nkiru found herself in dire financial straits. Though she laboured on the land left by her husband and took odd jobs, the money she earned was meagre, and farming took a toll on her health. Despite the challenges and the unwanted advances from men who saw her vulnerability, Nkiru maintained her dignity, determined not to compromise her values. Nkiru had heard tales of a kinsman, Ignatius, a wealthy man revered in Okpu town for his philanthropic deeds. His generosity was legendary, especially during the festive seasons when he returned with trucks laden with food and clothing for the village's poor. However, unbeknownst to many, Ignatius harbored a sinister side. His charitable acts were a facade. He exploited the very people he purported to help, binding them in a cycle of dependency and poverty, while enriching himself through nefarious means. One Christmas Eve, as Ignatius paraded through the village seeking new victims under the guise of courtesy visits, he encountered Nkiru. Captivated by her beauty and grace, he saw in her the purity he often exploited for his gain. Determined to have her, he approached under the pretense of kinship. Nkiru was outside preparing the evening meal with her children when Ignatius arrived. "Good evening, Madam Nkiru," he greeted, his voice smooth as silk. She responded with a polite smile, momentarily disarmed by his charm. "Good evening, sir," she said, instructing the girls to fetch a seat for their guest. Ignatius watched with a keen eye as the children resumed their tasks, the girls giggling, perhaps in anticipation of a reward. "I've heard much about you," he remarked, his smile lingering. "Hopefully all good things, sir," Nkiru replied, maintaining formalities despite his casual demeanor. "Please, call me Ignatius," he insisted, attempting to bridge the gap she set. "But respect dictates I address you properly," Nkiru countered, sensing an unsettling energy from the man across her. Their conversation meandered, but before departing, Ignatius pressed her to visit him privately, an invitation she declined, but agreed to collect the Christmas gifts he distributed to the widows. After he left, her daughters buzzed with questions and hopes tethered to Ignatius's wealth. "Why was he here?" Ozioma asked with a mischievous grin. Uchi chimed in. "I heard he's incredibly rich." Ikeni, frustrated, admonished his sisters. "Both of you should have some pride." "And you, full of goodness, where has it gotten you?" Uche retorted. Nkiru intervened as the tension rose. "The love of money is the root of all evil, my children," she cautioned. Ignatius had promised more than just material gifts. He had offered to sponsor their education, an offer she refused. "I will not allow it," Nkiru declared firmly. "I will do my best to see you through school as we have managed so far." "God forbid," Ozioma retorted, rising to her feet, her voice thick with frustration. "Can you hear yourself, mother?" she lashed out. "Do not speak out of line, Ozioma," Nkiru cautioned sternly. "The damage is done, mother. We're in trouble and you're refusing help. A mother like you. Look at us, your children. Haven't we suffered enough? Now I know you're a very selfish woman. A mother will do anything." Ozioma's words were sharp, slicing through the tense air. "Stop it, Ozioma, stop!" Nkiru yelled, confronting her daughter for the first time with a mix of anguish and authority in her voice. "Some things come with prices too great to accept." "Then accept the damn price, mother," Ozioma yelled back, her anger palpable as she stormed out of the room. "Enjoy your miserable meal," her sister snapped, following closely behind Ozioma, leaving the room in a heavy silence. The next day, Nkiru sent her two girls to collect the community gifts distributed by Ignatius. Despite the heated exchange, the family managed to find a momentary reprieve during Christmas. They ate to their fill and had enough provisions for the coming year. However, this brief solace was overshadowed by Ignatius's increased attentions towards Nkiru. Throughout his visits, Ignatius's intentions became painfully clear. All he desired was to entice Nkiru into a relationship, something she vehemently refused. She warned him never to visit her home again. "In all your giving, what you truly want is something I cannot give," Nkiru confronted Ignatius during one of his persistent visits, her voice steady but fierce. "I offer you comfort, a way out of your struggles, Ignatius countered, his tone smooth and coaxing. My dignity is not for sale, Nkiru replied sharply, her resolve unbreakable. I ask you respectfully, Mr. Ignatius, do not return here. As Ignatius left, his face masked his frustration. Nkiru stood firm at her doorway, a solitary figure of strength against the twilight sky, her spirit unyielded by the looming shadows of hardship. After the Christmas celebrations and the New Year that followed, Nkiru and her children fared well, a stark contrast to their usual struggles, thanks to the liberal generosity of Mr. Ignatius. Though grateful for the relief his gifts provided, which spared her household from the degradation of hand-to-mouth existence, Nkiru couldn't shake off the clarity of his intentions. It was all a well-calculated strategy from the beginning. I pity these women, she lamented one day, recalling her last unsettling conversation with Mr. Ignatius, which had ended badly. Is that what he's been doing? She repeatedly questioned herself, her mind swirling with doubts. In her moments of solitude, she whispered prayers, Father Lord, protect your daughter. Although swallowing her pride was difficult, Nkiru accepted the food items from Mr. Ignatius's house. However, each meal shared with her children was tainted with the knowledge of her indebtedness to him, especially since his intentions had been explicitly stated. Every bite she took felt like a betrayal to her own principles, and she often felt the urge to spit the food out, disgusted by the strings attached. Yet she couldn't stand to watch her children suffer from hunger. In private, she prayed for forgiveness for accepting aid she knew might compromise her family's future. Nkiru also blessed the food, praying that it would bring no ill luck to her home. The assistance they received lasted for a while, but only a few months into the new year, their struggles resumed. Once again, the helpless mother found herself unable to afford much, her heart heavy with the burdens that lay ahead. Nkiru was well aware of Ignatius's intentions, but she did not realize that her presence in the village, coupled with her fervent prayer and evangelical ministry, posed a significant threat to his dark powers. Since her arrival, her spiritual warfare had inadvertently disrupted his malevolent schemes, causing him significant losses. In a desperate bid to regain control, Ignatius resolved to destroy Nkiru, viewing her as a formidable obstacle that must be overcome. As the family faced ongoing hardships, Nkiru's faith remained steadfast. She urged her children, particularly her daughters, to remain patient and wait for God's intervention. Unfortunately, her pleas seemed futile as the girls grew increasingly rebellious and lost their way. Her son was forced to drop out of school due to financial constraints, a decision that deeply saddened Nkiru, but he comforted her, saying, I will go back to school, Mama. There is always time to finish if we have life. Their daily struggles continued until one day, Uche, Nkiru's second daughter, returned home in excruciating stomach pain. The family quickly rallied around her, but she began bleeding severely and was rushed to the village clinic. There, Nkiru received devastating news. The abortion was badly carried out, the doctor said, unaware of the gravity of her words. What? Nkiru gasped, struggling to comprehend. Her womb was tampered with during the abortion, leading to the bleeding. I'm finished, Nkiru cried out in agony. I have failed my children. Her son stepped in to console her, leading her away from the overwhelming scene. In the aftermath, feeling cornered and desperate, Nkiru invited Ignatius over, having heard he was in town. Ignatius, upon receiving her invitation, grinned maliciously, sensing her vulnerability. The next day he visited, finding Nkiru's children absent as planned. His initial intention was to take her to the city, but she vehemently refused, insisting that they meet at her home. When Ignatius arrived, Nkiru, waiting at the door, nearly changed her mind upon seeing him. The weight of the impending betrayal crushed her spirit. She felt as if she were on the verge of committing a murder, her heart pounding so fiercely it seemed it might burst from her chest. Nkiru felt like Judas Iscariot betraying Jesus, yet she steeled her heart and silenced her conscience. Forgive me, Father, she pleaded silently before letting him in. Within minutes, they sat drinking a strong wine that Ignatius had brought, intending to ensure his plans succeeded. Unaware of the full implications of her actions, Nkiru found herself in a compromising position on the bed with Ignatius. After the deed was done, she gasped in shock, muttering to herself, "What have I done?" Tears streamed down her face as she quickly covered her body, shaking with fear. "Now leave," she whispered to Ignatius, who had been watching her sleep. "Leave my home," she repeated, sobbing. "Your check will be on the table," Ignatius replied with a sinister grin, turning to walk away. As he left, Nkiru was consumed by regret and shame. She muttered, "Forgive me, Lord," her plea barely audible as she grappled with the magnitude of her actions. From that moment, Nkiru sensed something deeply wrong, more disturbing than the pangs of her guilty conscience. She felt sick and nauseous, whispering in confusion, "What has he done to me?" As she hastily dressed and made the bed. "I feel sick," she muttered repeatedly, her voice a low murmur of distress. She walked into the living room and picked up the check Ignatius had left on the table, her movements cautious to avoid arousing suspicion. But from that day onward, Nkiru's health mysteriously deteriorated. She developed a strange illness that caused her to lose a significant amount of weight overnight, alarming her children. "Why did you do that, Mama?" her son once asked during a moment of caregiving, catching Nkiru off guard with his knowledge of her secret. Not knowing what to say, she simply held his hand, her eyes pleading for understanding. "Forgive me, my son." Overwhelmed by the gravity of her confession, her son broke down, tears streaming down his face. Nkiru's illness rapidly worsened. She could manage her bills and maintain her household, but her life was slipping away. Only a week had passed, yet her condition grew dire. Friends and relatives gathered, whispering rumors of a spiritual attack, but only Nkiru knew the true cause was the affair she had been coerced into, a deliberate act by the malicious Ignatius. He had planned everything, luring her into a vulnerable position to achieve his dark objectives, and after that fateful night, he ceased all communication and never returned to the village. 2 weeks into her illness, Nkiru had become so frail that she needed assistance just to rise from her bed, which her son provided steadfastly. Witnessing their mother's struggle, her daughters, overwhelmed with guilt and sadness, cried beside her bed, seeking her forgiveness. "We've hurt you, Mama," Ozioma sobbed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Forgive me," she cried, joined by her sister Uche. But Nkiru could only nod weakly, her strength fading. One early morning, as her son Obi was about to fetch her medication, he encountered a mysterious man. "Good morning, sir," Obi greeted, his gaze fixed on the stranger who returned his look with an intense stare and a slight smile. "My son," the middle-aged man said, barely audible, yet his stare never wavered. "How are you, my son?" he continued, his interest apparent. "Fine, sir. Are you here to see someone?" Obi asked, puzzled. "Yes, my son, your mother. I'm here to see my family," the stranger replied, his tone serious. "My family?" "We live here. You seem like a stranger," Obi noted, his suspicion growing. "I know, my son. I was directed here by people who know you well. Please take me to your mother," the man urged, and they walked in together. Upon seeing the man, Nkiru's face registered shock so profound, she nearly gasped her last breath. "My God," she muttered. "Mother, are you all right?" Obi quickly asked, alarmed by her reaction. It wasn't long before they realized the man with them was their supposed dead father, Mr. Linus Eze. His return was a shock to the entire household and the village of Okpu, a man thought dead for over 2 decades, miraculously alive. But his reunion with his family was tainted with tragedy. The day after his return, Nkiru breathed her last in his embrace. It was a heart-wrenching experience. That very morning after his return, amid the ensuing chaos, when Nkiru revealed to her children, to their utter shock, that the man seated with them was their father, everyone broke down in tears. But the middle-aged man, Linus, cried even more as he held his dying wife. The children, now grown and matured, recognized that time was no longer on their mother's side and decided to leave the two alone to catch up on lost time. "Forgive me, the wife of my youth," Linus sobbed, gripping her hand firmly. "I knew you would return," she muttered, gasping for strength. "I waited. Forgive me," she pleaded. "Please don't speak," he urged gently. "You barely have strength." "But you have given me enough," Nkiru managed to say, her words nearly incoherent. "My darling," Linus cried, burying his face against her. "What happened to you?" he asked out of despair. "I couldn't do it. I couldn't help our children." "My God, save me," Linus cried, sobbing hard. "They said you died. I went down to the sea," he moaned in pain. "But you see, I'm here. Please get up and let us recover. I will do everything to get you on your feet." "But I'm tired," she softly said, looking away. "I will give you strength, my soulmate," Linus cried. "I betrayed the faith. I don't deserve to live," she continued, "but you do. There is always a second chance." "Forgive me," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face as she sobbed silently. "How did you survive?" she asked quietly. "I was sick after I was rescued, sick and lost in a strange land. The thought of you and our children kept me fighting. But now I don't know what to think anymore," Linus replied, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and despair. At this point, Nkiru instructed her husband to call the pastor. "I need to speak to both of you," she muttered. "But why? I have just returned." "See, get well. I'm wealthy now. Get well so we can start all over," Linus insisted, hopeful yet unaware of the gravity of her condition. "I'm tired. I need to rest," she almost pleaded, realizing her time was running short. That was when Linus realized that his wife was dying. The pastor was called, and in his and Linus's presence, Nkiru confessed to her sin of adultery with Mr. Ignatius. As soon as the last word left her lips, she breathed her last as her husband held her tightly and wouldn't let go. His loud cry sent the message of her death all over. The children hurried in and met him devastated. And that was how Mrs. Nkiru lost her life. Child of God, wait on the Lord. He will come through no matter what. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. 1 Peter 5:8 reminds us. Nkiru was pressured by trials to betray her faith, and that was when the enemy struck, a day before her victory because her husband returned a wealthy man. Christmas is coming. Child of God, never trade your body for any material gain. Trust and wait on the Lord always. He is ever faithful and never fails. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story. Please subscribe as your subscription means so much to us. Share this video with your loved ones. Comment on what you learned and don't forget to turn on your notification bell. I'll see you again in my next video. Stay tuned and Merry Christmas to you all.